we're back. I'll go post the link on Twitter. Otherwise, you guys might not be able to find me. I'm not sure, maybe. There we go. Hey, hi. I'm going to put... Oh, damn it. I copied your response, John, of the Latin. Yeah, I think it might have done. God damn it, never read any Latin aloud. I forgot rule number 1. If you see Latin, do not read it out loud. You might summon the great god Pan. There is a universal silence throughout the day, and the place is hidden away and not without horror. It is lit up by night by fires, and a chorus of agent resounds everywhere. Japan, I'm guessing. Well, that doesn't sound worrying at all. The sounds of the flutes and the ringing of cymbals are heard along the sea coast. That makes sense. Man, my Latin sucks, although it has been a really, really long time. But thank you for that. I did a quick Google on my phone and couldn't really see it. We are doing part 3 today. Because either some bad magic struck my computer or my internet's doing its thing. Or both. Okay, so that's 4 people. Are we all back? I think we're almost all back. 6 people. We got more than we had before. It's a bit odd. Okay, so for a couple of people who've just joined, Villiers is about to look through a book left by a dying man who is dead now, called Mayrick, who drew a bunch of pictures and then sent them to his friend. Well, if Pan is watching, then he'll know that I have enough chaos right now. Can't be bothered with any more, honestly. No, it's not true. If Pan is watching, I hope he's enjoying this. Please don't take my internet again. I really want to get through this. Okay, so John found a translation for the Latin. There is a universal silence throughout the day, and the place is hidden away and not without horror. It is lit up by night by fires, and a chorus of a Japan resounds everywhere. The sounds of flutes and the ringing of cymbals are heard along the sea coast. So, now we're going to look at the book itself. Oh, it told me no one was there, so I ended it. Oh, I'm sorry. But you're here now. We're all here. We're all here. On the 3rd page was a design which made Villiers start and look up at Austen. He was gazing abstractedly out of the window. Villiers turned page after page, absorbed in spite of himself in the frightful Walpurgisnacht of evil, strange, monstrous evil that the dead artist had set forth in hard black and white. The figures of fauns and satyrs and edgepans, they just use the word again without telling you what it is, danced before his eyes. The darkness of the thicket, the dance on the mountaintop, the scenes by lonely shores and green vineyards, by rocks and desert places passed before him, a world before which the human soul seemed to shrink back and shudder. Villiers whirled over the remaining pages. He had seen enough, but the picture on the last leaf caught his eye as he almost closed the book. Austen! Well, what is it? Do you know who that is? It was a woman's face, alone on the white page. Know who it is? No, of course not. I do. Who is it? It is Mrs. Herbert. Are you sure? I am perfectly sure of it. Poor Mayrick. Here's one more chapter in her history. But what do you think of the designs? Japan is another word for a fawn satyr pan. I figured, but it's nice to know. Thanks, Danny. What do you think of the designs? They are frightful. Lock the book up again, Austen. If I were you, I would burn it. Must be a terrible companion, even though it be in a chest. Yes, they are singular drawings. But I wonder what connection there could be between Mayrick and Mrs. Herbert, or what link between her and these designs. Oh, who can say? It is possible that the matter may end here, and we shall never know. But in my own opinion, this Helen Vaughan, or Mrs. Herbert, is only the beginning. She will come back to London, Austen. Depend upon it, she will come back, and we shall hear more about her then. I doubt it will be very pleasant news. The end of chapter 5. For those of you playing along, do you think Helen Vaughan might be back in London? Front of a goat and the back of a fish. How would you go about... Oh, God bless you, Josh. Yeah, basically hands up anybody who thinks they might know where Helen Vaughan is. I just keep smoothing my hair. I didn't put any hairspray on it, so it's not really staying where it should be. They thought they evolved from sea mammals to land mammals from the head down. Why? Oh, because of breathing air instead of water. I was thinking tail versus legs. Like, legs would obviously be more useful, but not if you can't breathe. Oh well, that's all my questions answered. Sorry about all the excess noises. I'm stretching my leg out. Sore. Chapter 6. The Suicides. Hi, Nick. How you doing? You've missed a few bits, so just go with it. It's all meant to be a bit of a dream. I'm going to have to figure out how I'm saying Lord Argentine. I'm going to say it Argentine. I'm going to be, what do you call it? Consistent. I don't even know the word for it. That's how little consistency I have. I'm sorry. I don't even have any cats, so I can show you a tail. Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. If your school didn't have Latin, then where did you go? Why are you trying to read? Are you a woman? Oh, yeah. It's a nightmare. So, chapter 6, The Suicides. I guess content warning for suicide. Oh, and Danny pointed out that Herbert had died as part of a run-on sentence earlier in the story. Starved to death in a locked room. Curious. Well, yeah, but Arthur Mark is writing in like the 1890s. We didn't have any Latin at school either, but the boys' school did. Girls' high, no Latin. Boys' high, compulsory Latin. And when the girls wanted Latin added, we were told if we could get 30 of us together, we could be bussed over there to take Latin with their teacher. I mean, God forbid their teacher come over here. And we couldn't get 30 of us. And we were absolutely gutted. But I went on to take a couple papers at university. Lord Argentine was a great favourite in London society. At 20, he had been a poor man. Outside girls teachers land. Lucky little buggers. It's making it much easier to learn all of the Romance languages. Lord Argentine was a great favourite in London society. At 20, he had been a poor man, decked with the surname of an illustrious family, but forced to earn a livelihood as best he could. And the most speculative of moneylenders would not have entrusted him with £50 on the chance of his ever changing his name for a title and his poverty for a great fortune. His father had been near enough to the fountain of good things to secure one of the family livings, but the son, even if he had taken orders, become a priest, would scarcely have obtained so much as this, and moreover felt no vocation for the ecclesiastical state. Thus he fronted the world with no better armour than the bachelor's gown and the wits of a younger son's grandson, with which equipment he contrived in some way to make a very tolerable fight of it. At 25, Mr. Charles Obernon saw himself still a man of struggles and of warfare with the world. But out of the 7 who stood before him and the high places of his family, 3 only remained. Basically, Lord Argentine, before he was Lord Argentine, he was called Charles Obernon. Pretty easy. No, he's the opposite of a fail son. He was born into fail circumstances and became Win through, I guess, lifting. So between him and the title, there were like 7 people, but these 3 only remained. These 3, however, were good lives, but yet not proof against the Zulu assegais and typhoid fever. What? He killed them with... And so one morning, Obernon woke up and found himself Lord Argentine, a man of 30 who had faced the difficulties of existence and had conquered. The situation amused him immensely, and he resolved that riches should be as pleasant to him as poverty had always been. Argentine, after some little consideration, came to the conclusion that dining, regarded as a fine art, was perhaps the most amusing pursuit open to fallen humanity, and thus his dinners became famous in London, and an invitation to his table a thing covetously desired. Hannibal vibes. Hannibal vibes. He grew up poor, the scion of a fucking castle family. And then bad things happened, and then he made himself a really good life, and now his dinners are famous. Hannibal. Oh, maybe not. After 10 years of lordship and dinners, Argentine still declined to be jaded, still persisted in enjoying life, and by a kind of infection had become recognised as the cause of joy in others, in short, as the best of company. His sudden and tragical death therefore caused a wide and deep sensation. People could hardly believe it, even though the newspaper was before their eyes, and the cry of "Mysterious death of a nobleman" came ringing up from the street. But there stood the brief paragraph. Lord Argentine was found dead this morning by his valet under distressing circumstances. It is stated that there can be no doubt that his lordship committed suicide, though no motive can be assigned for the act. The deceased nobleman was widely known in society and much liked for his genial manner and sumptuous hospitality. He is succeeded by, etc., etc. I too would like to be remembered for my genital manner and sumptuous hospitalities. Sorry, I'm going off topic. It's a serious subject. By slow degrees, the details came to light, but the case still remained a mystery. The chief witness at the inquest was the deceased valet, who said that the night before his death, Lord Argentine had dined with a lady of good position, whose name was suppressed in the newspaper reports. At about 11 o'clock, Lord Argentine had returned and informed his man that he should not require his services till the next morning. A little later, the valet had occasion to cross the hall and was somewhat astonished to see his master quietly letting himself out the front door. He had taken off his evening clothes, and was dressed in a Norfolk coat and knickerbockers and wore a low brown hat. Think of a tweedy Victorian guy. No, I want to be remembered for my genital manners. For my very gentlemanly use of what God has given me. I just read it wrong to start with, and I thought it was really funny. The valet had no reason to suppose that Lord Argentine had seen him, and though his master rarely kept late hours, thought little of the occurrence until the next morning, when he knocked at the bedroom door at 9:15 as usual. He received no answer, and after knocking 2 or 3 times, entered the room, and saw Lord Argentine's body leaning forward at an angle from the bottom of the bed. Oh, I know what he was doing. He found that his master had tied a cord securely to one of the short bedposts, and after making a running noose and slipping it round his neck, the unfortunate man must have resolutely fallen forward, to die by slow strangulation. He was dressed in the light suit in which the valet had seen him go out, and the doctor who was summoned pronounced that life had been extinct for more than 4 hours. All papers, letters, and so forth seemed in perfect order, and nothing was discovered which pointed in the most remote way to any scandal, either great or small. Here the evidence ended. Nothing more could be discovered. Several persons had been present at the dinner party at which Lord Argentine had assisted. They've written Lord Augustine here for some reason. And to all these he seemed in his usual genial spirits. The word genial is just ruined for me. The valet indeed said he thought that his master appeared a little excited when he came home, but confessed that the alteration in his manner was very slight, hardly noticeable indeed. It seemed hopeless to seek for any clue, and the suggestion that Lord Argentine had been suddenly attacked by acute suicidal mania was generally accepted. I think he was trying an advanced bedroom technique. It went wrong. No, I don't. I think he killed himself. It was otherwise, however, when within 3 weeks, 3 more gentlemen, one of them a nobleman, and the 2 others good men of good position and ample means, perished miserably in the almost precisely the same manner. Lord Swanley was found one morning in his dressing gown, hanging from a peg affixed to the wall, and Mr. Collier Stewart and Mr. Herries had chosen to die as Lord Argentine. There was no explanation in either case. A few bald facts, a living man in the evening, and a body with a black swollen face in the morning. Christ, the details that he does give they stick in the mind. The police had been forced to confess themselves powerless to arrest or to explain the sordid murders of Whitechapel, Jack the Ripper. But before the horrible suicides of Piccadilly and Mayfair, they were dumbfounded, for not even the mere ferocity which did duty as an explanation of the crimes of the East End could be of service in the West. Ooh, rich people never act like monsters. Each of these men who had resolved to die a tortured, shameful death was rich, prosperous, and to all appearances in love with the world, and not the acutest research could ferret out any shadow of a lurking motive in either case. There was a horror in the air, and men looked at one another's faces when they met, each wondering whether the other was to be the victim of the 5th nameless tragedy. Journalists sought in vain for their scrapbooks, for materials whereof to concoct reminiscent articles, and the morning paper was unfolded in many a house with a feeling of awe. No man knew when or where the next blow would light. A short while after the last of these terrible events, Austen came to see Mr. Villiers. He was curious to know whether Villiers had succeeded in discovering any fresh traces of Mrs. Herbert, either through Clark or by other sources, and he asked the question soon after he had sat down. "No," said Villiers. "I wrote to Clark, but he remains obdurate, and I have tried other channels, but without any result. I can't find out what became of Helen Vaughan after she left Paul Street, but I think she must have gone abroad." But to tell the truth, Austen, I haven't paid much attention to the matter for the last few weeks. I knew poor Harry's intimately, and his terrible death has been a great shock to me. A great shock. I can well believe it, answered Austen gravely. You know, Argentine was a friend of mine. If I remember rightly, we were speaking of him that day you came to my rooms. Hey! Other Josh! Welcome! Other Josh was briefly the Alpha Josh the other day. He liked it. He was excited. I was excited for him. We have fun. We make excitement. We were speaking of him that day you came to my rooms. Yes, it was in connection with that house in Ashley Street, Mrs. Beaumont's house. You said something about Argentine's dining there. Quite so. Of course, you know, it was there Argentine dined the night before his death. Josh Jr. has entered the chat. No, I had not heard that. Oh, yes. The name was kept out of the papers to spare Mrs. Beaumont. Argentine was a great favourite of hers, and it said that she was in a terrible state for some time after. Joshua Secundus. I'm going to call him Joshua Minor. Just like they do at Monty Python school. You know, when they dress up, they pretend they're at a school. Hilarious. A curious look came over Villiers' face. He seemed undecided whether to speak or not. Austen began again. I have never experienced such a feeling of horror as when I read the account of Argentine's death. I didn't understand it at the time, and I don't now. I knew him well, and it completely passes my understanding for what possible cause he, or any of the others for the matter of that, could have resolved in cold blood to die in such an awful manner. You know how men babble away each other's characters in London. You may be sure any buried scandal or hidden skeleton would have been brought to light in such a case as this, but nothing of the sort has taken place. As for the theory of mania, that is very well, of course, for the coroner's jury, but everybody knows that it's all nonsense. Suicidal mania is not smallpox. Magnet and Jim. Some bugger major and some other prick minor. Yeah. Nowadays, of course, we know that suicide is contagious. And if you are feeling upset by these graphic descriptions, well, they're not graphic actually. If anything in this content is disturbing to you, please do contact the authorities. Or like the Samaritans, or some shit. I'm trying to copy what they say on TV3. There you go. That's my interest in your welfare. Austen relapsed into gloomy silence. Villiers sat silent also, watching his friend. The expression of indecision still fleeted across his face. He seemed as if weighing his thoughts in the balance, and the considerations he was resolving left him still silent. Austen tried to shake off the remembrance of tragedies as hopeless and perplexed as the labyrinth of Daedalus, and began to talk in an indifferent voice of the more pleasant incidents and adventures of the season. I want to eat cheese. What do I have for tea? No, it's not the time. Oh, Mr. Fitz is here. I think he heard the C word. Come on, boy. Let me see, do I have any? I can't say the word of the thing that Fitzy likes because he knows the word. No. Ow! I don't have any here, but I do have... Ow. A needle from my sewing kit. Oh no, I read the Latin out loud and now I've pricked myself with a needle and a drop of blood came out. Oh well. Welcome to the horror movie, everybody. So Austen is saying, that Mrs. Beaumont, he said, of whom we were speaking, is a great success. She has taken London almost by storm. I met her the other night at Fulham's. She is really a remarkable woman. You have met Mrs. Beaumont? Yes, she had quite a court around her. She would be called very handsome, I suppose, and yet there is something about her face which I didn't like. The features are exquisite, but the expression is strange. And all the time I was looking at her, and afterwards when I was going home, I had a curious feeling that very expression was in some way or another familiar to me. She's got resting bitch face. In modern times, science has understood this. You must have seen her in the Row. No, I am sure I never set eyes on the woman before. It is that which makes it puzzling. And to the best of my belief, I have never seen anyone like her. What I felt was a kind of dim, far-off memory, vague but persistent. The only sensation I can compare it to is that odd feeling one sometimes has in a dream, when fantastic cities and wondrous lands and phantom personages appear familiar and accustomed. Villiers nodded. Yes, he's a minor god. Flora that time. Villiers nodded and gazed aimlessly around the room, possibly in search of something on which to turn the conversation. His eyes fell on an old chest, somewhat like that in which the artist's strange legacy lay hid beneath a Gothic scutcheon. "Have you written to the doctor about Paul Mayrick?" he asked. "Yes, I wrote asking for full particulars as to his illness and death. I don't expect to have an answer for another 3 weeks or a month." I thought I might as well inquire whether Mayrick knew an Englishwoman named Herbert, and if so, whether the doctor could give me any information about her. But it's very possible that Mayrick fell in love with her at New York or Mexico or San Francisco. I have no idea as to the extent or direction of his travels. Yes, and it's very possible that the woman may have more than one name. Exactly. I wish I had thought of asking you to lend me the portrait of her which you possess. I might have enclosed it in my letter to Dr. Matthews. So you might. That never occurred to me. We might send it now. Huck, what are those boys doing? While the two men had been talking together, a confused noise of shouting had been gradually growing louder. The noise rose from the eastward and swelled down Piccadilly, drawing nearer and nearer, a very torrent of sound, surging up streets usually quiet and making every window a frame for a face, curious or excited. The cries and voices came echoing up the silent street where Villiers lived, growing more distinct as they advanced. And as Villiers spoke, an answer rang up from the pavement. "The West End horrors! Another awful suicide! Full details!" That's nice. Austen rushed down the stairs and bought a paper and read out the paragraph to Villiers as the uproar in the street rose and fell. The window was open, and the air seemed full of noise and terror. "Another gentleman has fallen a victim to the terrible epidemic of suicide which for the last month has prevailed in the West End. Mr. Sidney Crashaw, of Stoke House, Fulham, and King's Pomeroy, Devon, was found after a prolonged search, hanging dead from the branch of a tree in his garden at 1 o'clock today. The deceased gentleman dined last night at the Carlton Club and seemed in his usual health and spirits. He left the club at about 10 o'clock and was seen walking leisurely up St. James's Street a little later. Subsequent to this, his movements cannot be traced. On the discovery of the body, medical aid was at once summoned, but life had evidently been long extinct. So far as is known, Mr. Crashaw had no trouble or anxiety of any kind. This painful suicide, it will be remembered, is the fifth of the kind in the last month. The authorities at Scotland Yard are unable to suggest any explanation of these terrible occurrences." Austen put down the paper in mute horror. "I shall leave London tomorrow," he said. "It is a city of nightmares. How awful this is, Villiers." Mr. Villiers was sitting by the window, quietly looking out into the street. He had listened to the newspaper report attentively, and the hint of indecision was no longer on his face. Come up here then. Come on, boyo. Come on. He just came in. He's just going out. That's my Fitzy. Princess Anne. Wait a moment, Austen, Villiers replied. I have made up my mind to mention a little matter that occurred last night. It's stated, I think, that Crashaw was last seen alive in St. James Street shortly after 10. Yes, I think so. I will look again. Yes, you are quite right. Quite so. Well, I am in a position to contradict that statement, at all events. Crashaw was seen after that, considerably later indeed. How do you know? Because I happened to see Crashaw myself at about 2 o'clock this morning. You saw Crashaw? You, Villiers? Yes, I saw him quite distinctly. Indeed, there were but a few feet between us. Where in heaven's name did you see him? Not far. I saw him in Ashley Street. He was just leaving a house. Did you notice what house it was? Yes. It was Mrs. Beaumont's. Are we shocked? Villiers, think what you are saying. There must be some mistake. How could Crashaw be in Mrs. Beaumont's house at 2 o'clock in the morning? Surely you must have been dreaming, Villiers. You were always rather fanciful. Oh, how dare you? How dare you? This lady's reputation. No, I was wide awake enough. Even if I had been dreaming, as you say, what I saw would have roused me effectually. What you saw? Well, what did you see? Was there anything strange about Crashaw? But I can't believe it. It's impossible. Well, if you like, I will tell you what I saw, or, if you please, what I think I saw, and you can judge for yourself. Very good, Villiers. The noise and clamour of the street had died away, though now and then the sound of shouting still came from the distance, and the dull, leaden silence seemed like the quiet after an earthquake or a storm. Villiers turned from the window and began speaking. I was at a house near Regent's Park last night, and when I came away, the fancy took me to walk home instead of taking a hansom cab, horse taxi. It was a clear, pleasant night enough, and after a few minutes I had the streets pretty much to myself. It's a curious thing, Austen, to be alone in London at night. The gas lamps stretching away in perspective, and the dead silence, and then perhaps the rush and clatter of a hansom on the stones. You're a handsome cat. Do you get it? Like hansom cab, but she didn't like it. The dead silence and perhaps the rush and clatter of a hansom on the stones, and the fire starting up under the horse's hooves. I walked along pretty briskly, for I was feeling a little tired of being out in the night, and as the clocks were striking 2, I turned down Ashley Street, which you know is on my way. It was quieter than ever there, and the lamps were fewer. Altogether it looked as dark and gloomy as a forest in winter. I had done about half the length of the street when I heard a door closed very softly, and naturally I looked up to see who was abroad like myself at such an hour. As it happens, there is a street lamp close to the house in question, and I saw a man standing on the step. He had just shut the door and his face was towards me, and I recognized Crashaw directly. I never knew him to speak to, but I had often seen him, and I am positive that I was not mistaken in my man. I looked into his face for a moment, and then, I will confess the truth, I set off at a good run and kept it up till I was within my own door. Why? Why? Because it made my blood run cold to see that man's face. I could never have supposed that such an infernal medley of passions could have glared out of any human eyes. I almost fainted as I looked. I knew I had looked into the eyes of a lost soul, Austen. The man's outward form remained, but all hell was within it. Furious lust, and hate that was like fire, and the loss of all hope, and horror that seemed to shriek aloud to the night, though his teeth were shut, and the utter blackness of despair. I am sure that he did not see me. He saw nothing that you or I can see. But what he saw, I hope we never shall. I do not know when he died. I suppose in an hour or perhaps two. But when I passed down Ashley Street and heard the closing door, that man no longer belonged to this world. It was a devil's face I looked upon. There was an interval of silence in the room when Villiers ceased speaking. The light was failing, and all the tumult of an hour ago was quite hushed. Austen had bent his head at the close of the story, and his hand covered his eyes. "What can it mean?" he said at length. "Who knows, Austen, who knows? It's a black business, but I think we had better keep it to ourselves, for the present at any rate. I will see if I cannot learn anything about that house through private channels of information, and if I do light upon anything, I will let you know." End of chapter 6. And yes, that is an incredible description of depression. I mean, that's how I feel every day. And I still manage to look like Princess Anne. Making light of depression. I'm allowed to. I have it. But let's just go back and listen to that again, because that was brilliant. Furious lust, hate like fire, the loss of all hope, horror that seemed to shriek to the night, and the utter blackness of despair. I mean, the furious lust isn't always there, depending on what antidepressants you're on, but everything else, yeah, it's basically the day-to-day. I guess Victorian men weren't, quite as strong as me. How long have we been going? Fair well. I think we can probably finish it today. Oh, there was some more Latin, but there's actually a thing for it. Translation. A brain talking is what I was thinking. Vince! He wants to come inside again. Again. Come on. I know you're a good boy. Jeez Louise. Run out of cheese at this rate. I actually need the loo, so I'm going to put this on mute and put some cheese on the edge of the couch so that you guys can watch if the cats come and get it. We'll be back in a couple of seconds. How's that for timing? Was that nice? That's fits for thank you. Nothing. Home to the cheese channel. I'm gonna watch my awful cats eat cheese. Gonna bet on which of them's gonna yell at the other. Or try and go in and out of the doors. Okay. The Great God Pan, Chapter 7, The Encounter in Soho. 3 weeks later, Austen received a note from Villiers asking him to call either that afternoon or the next. He chose the nearer date and found Villiers sitting as usual by the window, apparently lost in meditation on the drowsy traffic of the street. There was a bamboo table by his side, a fantastic thing, enriched with gilding and queer painted scenes, and on it lay a little pile of papers arranged and docketed as neatly as anything in Mr. Clark's office. Sorry, need a drink. Cats are very boring. They don't really play, they just sit. I don't know if you heard that. He wants to go outside again. Hey. Bitch. Go on. Good boy. If my landlord lived below me, I'm pretty sure he'd get me a cat door. Well, that's a problem for the girl who lives below me to deal with. And she also got her recycling bin taken away by the council because she wouldn't stop putting rubbish in it. And now she's got my recycling bin. And it's like, what do I do? Do I just take it back? I mean, yeah, but is she going to get that one taken away as well? I could just talk to her. I'm not going to talk to her. I can't be bothered. I'm so tired. Well, Villiers, have you made any discoveries in the last 3 weeks? I think so. I have here 1 or 2 memoranda which struck me as singular, and there is a statement to which I shall call your attention. And these documents relate to Mrs. Beaumont. It was really Crashaw whom you saw that night standing on the doorstep of the house in Ashley Street. As to that matter, my belief remains unchanged, but neither my inquiries nor their results have any special relation to Crashaw. But my investigations have had a strange issue. I have found out who Mrs. Beaumont is. Who is she? In what way do you mean? I mean that you and I know her better under another name. What name is that? Herbert. Herbert? Austen repeated the word, dazed with astonishment. Because, unlike us, Austen is not aware that there has only been one other named woman in this story. Oh no, there was Mary at the beginning. Yes, Mrs. Herbert of Paul Street, Helen Vaughan of earlier adventures unknown to me. You had reason to recognise the expression of her face. When you go home, look at the face in Mayrick's Book of Horrors, and you will know the sources of your recollection. What are you doing? What are you doing? Who's that? Who's that? It's your fans. Yes, it's your fans, you little... Yes. You little clout-chasing bitch. Oh, you're all about those likes and retweets. I'm sorry, I called you a clout-chasing bitch. I'm sorry. Oh, it's the great god Flora. Somehow even more chaotic. Hey, camera can't really get you, sweetie. Oh, you're going to go even lower? Alright. She might come up and sit higher where you can see her. Mightn't you? They can't see you, my love. They can see you a tiny bit. Um, and you have proof of this? Yes, the best of proof. I have seen Mrs. Beaumont, or shall we say Mrs. Herbert. Where did you see her? Hardly in a place where you would expect to see a lady who lives in Ashley Street, Piccadilly. I saw her entering a house in one of the meanest and most disreputable streets in Soho. In fact, I had made an appointment, though not with her, and she was precise to both time and place. All this seems very wonderful, but I cannot call it incredible. You must remember, Villiers, that I have seen this woman, in the ordinary adventure of London society, talking and laughing and sipping her coffee in a commonplace drawing room with commonplace people. But you know what you are saying. I lose track of the Fitz indoor-outdoor status as well. I frequently think they're all out for the night and then he'll come out from behind a curtain 5 hours later. Or I'll only know he's there because I can hear vomiting in the middle of the night. He's creating a problem. You creating a problem, little girl? You show your face for the people just a little bit? Ah, she's so naughty. She learns it from me, and I learn it from her, and it goes round and round, and we just get naughtier. I'm also really good at writing wedding vows. That's one of them. Sweetie. You know what you are saying. I do. I have not allowed myself to be led by surmises or fancies. It was with no thought of finding Helen Vaughan that I searched for Mrs. Beaumont in the dark waters of the life of London, but such has been the issue. You must have been in strange places, Villiers. Yes, I have been in very strange places. It would have been useless, you know, to go to Ashley Street and ask Mrs. Beaumont to give me a short sketch of her previous history. No, assuming, as I had to assume, that her record was not of the cleanest, it would be pretty certain that at some previous time she must have moved in circles not quite so refined as her present ones. Lula, lula. If you see mud at the top of a stream, you may be sure that it was once at the bottom. I went to the bottom. I have always been fond of diving into Queer Street for my amusement. Arthur, you're killing me. And I found my knowledge of that locality and its inhabitants very useful. It is perhaps needless to say that my friends had never heard the name of Beaumont, and as I had never seen the lady and was quite unable to describe her, I had to set to work in an indirect way. Darling, please move so that you're sitting up on me and not on my leg, because it's so uncomfortable and it hurts and you're putting your claws in. You've got to have nice hands, okay? I'll just put my hand here then, shall I? The people there know me. I have been able to do some of them a service now and again, so they made no difficulty about giving their information. They were aware I had no communication, direct or indirect, with Scotland Yard. I had to cast out a good many lines, though, before I got what I wanted, and when I landed the fish, I did not for a moment suppose it was my fish. But I listened to what I was told out of a constitutional liking for useless information, and I found myself in possession of a very curious story, though, as I imagined, not the story I was looking for. It was to this effect. Some 5 or 6 years ago, a woman named Raymond suddenly made her appearance in the neighbourhood to which I'm referring. And when they say what the woman's name is, they mean her surname. No one gives a shit what her first name is. Miss Raymond. She was described to me as being quite young, probably not more than 17 or 18, very handsome, and looking as if she came from the country. I should be wrong in saying that she found her level in going to this particular quarter, or associating with these people, for from what I was told, I should think the worst den in London far too good for her. The person from whom I got my information, as you suppose, was no great Puritan, shuddered and grew sick in telling me of the nameless infamies which were laid to her charge. After living there for a year, yeah, even poor people thought she was debauched. Can you imagine? After living there for a year, or perhaps a little more, she disappeared as suddenly as she came, and they saw nothing of her till about the time of the Paul Street case. At first she came back to her old haunts only occasionally, then more frequently, and finally took up her abode there as before, and remained for 6 or 8 months. It's of no use my going into details as to the life that woman led. If you want particulars, you can look at Mayrick's Legacy. Those designs were not drawn from his imagination. She again disappeared, and the people of the place saw nothing of her till a few months ago. My informant told me that she had taken some rooms in a house which he pointed out, and these rooms she was in the habit of visiting 2 or 3 times a week, and always at 10 in the morning. I was led to expect that one of these visits would be paid on a certain day, about a week ago, and I accordingly managed to be on the lookout in company with my cicerone at 9:45. I hate you so much. Polite hands, polite hands. Polite hands, nice hands, gentle hands. Gentle hands with no spikes in them. Good girl. She's lucky I love her. Inordinately. 9:45. Hour and the lady came with equal punctuality. My friend and I were standing under an archway a little back from the street, but she saw us and gave me a glance that I should be long in forgetting. That look was quite enough for me. I knew Miss Raymond to be Mrs. Herbert. As for Mrs. Beaumont, she had quite gone out of my head. She went into the house, and I watched it till 4 o'clock when she came out, and then I followed her. It was a long chase, and I had to be very careful to keep a long way in the background, and yet not lose sight of the woman. She's about to harm me. I can tell. 'Cause you're acting sweet, but your tail's wagging. You're about to hurt me. You are Helen Vaughan. If anyone is. Sorry, baby, you're not Helen Vaughan. She took me down to the Strand, and then to Westminster, and then up St. James's Street and along Piccadilly. I felt queerish when I saw her turn up Ashley Street. The thought that Mrs. Herbert was Mrs. Beaumont came into my mind, but it seemed too impossible to be true. I waited at the corner, keeping my eye on her all the time, and I took particular care to note the house at which she stopped. It was the house with the gay curtains, the home of flowers, the house out of which Crashaw came the night he hanged himself in his garden. I was just going away with my discovery when I saw an empty carriage come round and draw up in front of the house, and I came to the conclusion that Mrs. Herbert was going out for a drive, and I was right. There, as it happened, I met a man I know, and we stood talking together a little distance from the carriageway, to which I had my back. We had not been there for 10 minutes when my friend took off his hat, and I glanced round and saw the lady I had been following all day. "Who is that?" I said, and his answer was, "Mrs. Beaumont, lives in Ashley Street." Of course, there could be no doubt after that. I don't know whether she saw me, but I don't think she did. I went home at once. In consideration, I thought I had a sufficiently good case with which to go to Clark. Why to Clark? Because I am sure that Clark is in possession of facts about this woman, facts of which I know nothing. That's right. Bet you want to hop down, don't you? Want to hop down before you hurt me? No? Just keep filming. We have to get everything on tape. Why to Clark? Because I am sure that Clark is in possession of facts about this woman, facts of which I know nothing. Well, what then? Mr. Villiers leaned back in his chair and looked reflectively at Austen for a moment before he answered. My idea was that Clark and I should call on Mrs. Beaumont. You would never go into such a house as that. No, no, Villiers, you cannot do it. Hooray. Besides, consider what result. I will tell you soon. But I was going to say that my information does not end here. It has been completed in an extraordinary manner. Look at this neat little packet of manuscript. It is paginated, you see, and I have indulged in the civil coquetry of a ribbon of red tape. It has almost a legal air, hasn't it? Run your eye over it, Austen. It is an account of the entertainment Mrs. Beaumont provided for her choicer guests. The man who wrote this escaped with his life, but I do not think he will live many years. The doctors tell him he must have sustained some severe shock to the nerves. What happens at Mrs. Beaumont's parties? Austen took the manuscript, but never read it. Opening the neat pages at haphazard, his eye was caught by a word and a phrase that followed it, and sick at heart, with white lips and a cold sweat pouring like water from his temples, he flung the paper down. Take it away, Villiers. Never speak of this again. Are you made of stone, man? Why, the dread and horror of death itself, the thoughts of the man who stands in the keen morning air on the black platform, bound, the bell tolling in his ears, and waits for the harsh rattle of the bolt, are as nothing compared to this. I will not read it. I should never sleep again. Very good. I can fancy what you saw. Yes, it is horrible enough. But after all, it is an old story. An old mystery played in our day, and in dim London streets instead of amidst the vineyards and the olive gardens. We know what happened to those who chanced to meet the great god Pan, and those who are wise know that all symbols are symbols of something, not of nothing. It was indeed an exquisite symbol beneath which men long ago veiled their knowledge of the most awful, most secret forces which lie at the heart of all things, forces before which the souls of men must wither and die and blacken as their bodies blacken under the electric current. Such forces cannot be named, cannot be spoken, cannot be imagined except under a veil and a symbol to the most of us appearing a quaint poetic fancy, to some a foolish tale. But you and I, at all events, have known something of the terror that may dwell in the secret place of life, manifested under human flesh, that which is without form, taking to itself a form. Oh, Austen, how can it be? How is it that the very sunlight does not turn to blackness before this thing, the hard earth melt and boil beneath such a burden? It's a tale as old as time. Beauty is a beast. Villiers was pacing up and down the room, and the beads of sweat stood out on his forehead. Austen sat silent for a while, but Villiers saw him make a sign upon his breast. I'm guessing it's Catholic magic. I say again, Villiers, you surely will never enter such a house as that. You would never pass out alive. Yes, Austen, I shall go out alive. I and Clark with me. What do you mean? You cannot. You would not dare. Wait a moment. The air was very pleasant and fresh this morning. There was a breeze blowing even through this dull street, and I thought I would take a walk. Piccadilly stretched before me a clear, bright vista, and the sun flashed on the carriages and of the quivering leaves in the park. It was a joyous morning, and men and women looked at the sky and smiled as they went about their work or their pleasure, and the wind blew as blithely as upon the meadows and the scented gorse. But somehow or other I got out of the bustle and the gaiety, and found myself walking slowly along a quiet, dull street, where there seemed to be no sunshine and no air, and where the few foot passengers loitered as they walked, and hung indecisively about corners and archways. I walked along, hardly knowing where I was going or what I did there, but feeling impelled, as one sometimes is, to explore still further, with a vague idea of reaching some unknown goal. Thus I forged up the street, noting the small traffic of the milk shop, and wondering at the incongruous medley of penny pipes, black tobacco, sweets, newspapers, and comic songs which here and there jostled one another in the short compass of a single window. A predecessor of the dairy, or corner shop, or drugstore, I want to say, for America. I think it was a cold shudder that suddenly passed through me that first told me that I had found what I wanted. I looked up from the pavement and stopped before a dusty shop, above which the lettering had faded, where the red bricks of 200 years ago had grimed to black, where the windows had gathered to themselves the dust of winters innumerable. I saw what I required, but I think it was 5 minutes before I had steadied myself and could walk in and ask for it in a cool voice and with a calm face. I think there must even then have been a tremor in my words, for the old man who came out of the back parlour and fumbled slowly amongst his goods looked oddly at me as he tied the parcel. I paid what he asked and stood leaning by the counter with a strange reluctance to take up my goods and go. I asked about the business and learnt that trade was bad and the profits cut down sadly, but then the street was not what it was before traffic had been diverted. But that was done 40 years ago, just before my father died, he said. I got away at last and walked along sharply. It was a dismal street indeed, and I was glad to return to the bustle and the noise. Would you like to see my purchase? Austin said nothing, but nodded his head slightly. He looked white and sick. Villiers pulled out a drawer on the bamboo table and showed Austin a long coil of cord, hard and new, and at one end was a running noose. It is the best hempen cord, said Villiers, just as it used to be made for the old trade, the man told me. Not an inch of jute from end to end. Austin set his teeth hard and stared at Villiers, growing whiter as he looked. You would not do it, he murmured at last. You would not have blood on your hands. My God, he exclaimed with sudden vehemence, you cannot mean this, Villiers, that you will make yourself a hangman. No. I shall offer a choice, and leave Helen Vaughan alone with this cord in a locked room for 15 minutes. If, when we go in, it is not done, I shall call the nearest policeman. That is all. I must go now. I cannot stay here any longer. I cannot bear this. Good night. Good night, Austin. The door shut, but in a moment it was open again, and Austin stood, white and ghastly, in the entrance. I was forgetting, he said, but I too have something to tell. I have received a letter from Dr. Harding of Buenos Aires. He said that he attended Mayrick for 3 weeks before his death. And does he say what carried him off in the prime of life? It was not fever? No, it was not fever. According to the doctor, it was an utter collapse of the whole system, probably caused by some severe shock. But he states that the patient would tell him nothing, and that he was consequently at some disadvantage in treating the case. Is there anything more? Yes. Dr. Harding ends his letter by saying, I think this is all the information I can give you about your poor friend. He had not been long in Buenos Aires and knew scarcely anyone, with the exception of a person who did not bear the best of characters and has since left, a Mrs. Vaughan. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter. A lot of mystery here, but it's a lot of things that we are not allowed to see. The manuscript that's got details and evidence of what actually goes on at Helen Vaughan's bacchanalia, which is so depraved and horrific that Austen only caught the sight of one entry and basically puked inside his brain. So we're not really supposed to know. We're just kind of supposed to. This is the aristocrats, I guess. The aristocrats joke, not the aristocats. So yeah, Villiers has all this evidence of all these incredibly horrific things Helen Vaughan's been doing, and he's going to confront her with it and give her a robe. Be like, there you go. You got that. I've got the proof. I'll leave you alone for 15 minutes, then I'm calling the cops. Poirot used to do that all the time. He'd be like, yes, he is a murderer. I encourage him to commit le suicide. And everyone was like, Poirot, what the fuck? The Secret History, was that any good? But that's not the end of the story. We're at chapter 8, The Fragments, which I believe is fairly graphic, and the last chapter. Nice. Oh, Poirot, he's a great guy, but he loves his suicide, you know. So chapter 8, the last one, kind of graphic and rough for the story we've been reading, and the last chapter, The Fragments. Amongst the papers of the well-known physician, Dr. Robert Matheson of Ashley Street, Piccadilly, who died suddenly of apoplectic seizure at the beginning of 1892, a leaf of manuscript paper was found covered with pencil jottings. These notes were in Latin, much abbreviated, and had evidently been made in great haste. The manuscript was only deciphered with difficulty, and some words have, up to the present time, evaded all the efforts of the expert employed. The date, 25th July 1888, is written on the right-hand corner of the manuscript. The following is a translation of Dr. Matheson's manuscript. Oh, nice. I'm going to try and remember that. Whether science would benefit by these brief notes if they could be published, I do not know, but rather doubt. But certainly I shall never take the responsibility of publishing or divulging one word of what is here written, not only on account of my oath given freely to those two persons who were present, but also because the details are too abominable. It is probably that, upon mature consideration and after weighting the good and evil, I shall one day destroy this paper, or at least leave it under seal to my friend D, trusting in his discretion, to use it or to burn it as he may think fit. The significance of the. As was befitting, I did all that my knowledge suggested to make sure that I was suffering under no delusion. At first astounded. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't know if I should explain about rope or not. But yeah, it's old style. Kind they used to hang people with. Good old hempen rope. That was the old profession that they were talking about. But yeah, thank you, John. I don't know sometimes which bits are kind of self-explanatory and which bits aren't. So sometimes I over-explain and sometimes I underdo it. Oh, never mind. Doesn't matter. Doctor making sure he's under no delusion. At first astounded, I could hardly think. But in a minute's time I was sure that my pulse was steady and regular, and that I was in my real and true senses. I then fixed my eyes quietly on what was before me. Though horror and revolting nausea rose up within me, and an odour of corruption choked my breath, I remained firm. I was then privileged, or accursed, I dare not say which, to see that which was on the bed, lying there black like ink, transformed before my eyes. The skin and the flesh, and the muscles and the bones and the firm structure of the human body that I had thought to be unchangeable and permanent as adamant began to melt and dissolve. I know that the body may be separated into its elements by external agencies, but I should have refused to believe what I saw. For here there was some internal force of which I knew nothing that caused dissolution and change. Here, too, was all the work by which man had been made repeated before my eyes. I saw the form waver from sex to sex, dividing itself from itself, and then again reunited. Then I saw the body descend to the beast whence it ascended, and that which was on the heights go down to the depths, even into the abyss of all being. The principle of life, which makes organism, always remained, while the outward form changed. The light within the room had turned to blackness, not the darkness of night in which objects are seen dimly, for I could see clearly and without difficulty, but it was the negation of light. Objects were presented to my eyes, if I may say so, without any medium, in such a manner that if there had been a prism in the room, I should have seen no colours represented in it. That's a very interesting. It's a very interesting description of a room with no light, but where you can see. That's really good. I watched, and at last I saw nothing but a substance as jelly. Then the ladder was ascended again. Here the manuscript is illegible. For one instant I saw a form shaped in dimness before me, which I will not farther describe. But the symbol of this form may be seen in ancient sculptures, and in paintings which survive beneath the lava, too foul to be spoken of. As a horrible and unspeakable shape, neither man nor beast, was changed into human form. There came finally death. I, who saw all this, not without great horror and loathing of soul, here write my name, declaring all that I have said on this paper to be true. Robert Matheson, medical doctor. And then we've got a few stars to separate that from this. Such, Raymond, is the story of what I know and what I have seen. The burden of it was too heavy for me to bear alone, and yet I could tell it to none but you. So we're back with Clark. Villiers, who was with me at the last, knows nothing of that awful secret of the wood, of how what we both saw die lay upon the smooth, sweet turf amidst the summer flowers, half in sun and half in shadow, and holding the girl Rachel's hand, called and summoned those companions, and shaped in solid form upon the earth we tread upon, the horror which we can but hint at, which we can only name under a figure. I would not tell Villiers of this, nor of that resemblance which struck me as with a blow upon my heart, when I saw the portrait which filled the cup of terror at the end. What this can mean, I dare not guess. I know that what I saw perish was not Mary, and yet in the last agony Mary's eyes looked into mine. Whether there can be anyone who can show the last link in this chain of awful mystery, I do not know. But if there be anyone who can do this, you, Raymond, are the man. And if you know the secret, it rests with you to tell it or not, as you please. I am writing this letter to you immediately on my getting back to town. I have been in the country for the last few days. Perhaps you will be able to guess which part. While the horror and wonder of London was at its height, for Mrs. Beaumont, as I have told you, is well known in society, I wrote to my friend Dr. Phillips, giving some brief outline, or rather hint, of what happened, and asking him to tell me the name of the village where the events he had related to me occurred. He gave me the name, as he said with the less hesitation, because Rachel's father and mother were dead, and the rest of the family had gone to a relative in the state of Washington 6 months before. The parents, he said, had undoubtedly died of grief and horror caused by the terrible death of their daughter, and by what had gone before that death. On the evening of the day which I received Philip's letter, I was at Carmain. Can never say those words. And standing beneath the mouldering Roman walls, white with the winters of 1700 years, I looked over the meadow where had once stood the older temple of the god of the deeps, and saw a house gleaming in the sunlight. It was the house where Helen had lived. I stayed at Kermayan for several days. The people of their place, I found, knew little and had guessed less. Those whom I spoke to on the matter seemed surprised that an antiquarian, as I had professed myself to be, should trouble about a village tragedy, of which they gave a very commonplace version, and, as you may imagine, I told nothing of what I knew. Most of my time was spent in the great wood that rises just above the village and climbs the hillside, and goes down to the river in the valley. Such another long, lovely valley, Raymond, as that on which we looked one summer night, walking to and fro before your house. For many an hour I strayed through the maze of the forest, turning now to right and now to left, pacing slowly down long alleys of undergrowth, shadowy and chill, even under the midday sun, and halting beneath great oaks, lying on the short turf of a clearing where the faint, sweet scent of wild roses came to me on the wind and mixed with the heavy perfume of the elder, whose mingled odour is like the odour of the room of the dead, a vapour of incense and corruption. I stood at the edges of the wood, gazing at all the pomp and procession of the foxgloves towering amidst the bracken and shining red in the broad sunshine, and beyond them into deep thickets of close undergrowth where springs boil up from the rock and nourish the waterweeds, dank and evil. But in all my wanderings I avoided one part of the wood. It was not till yesterday that I climbed to the summit of the hill and stood upon the ancient Roman road that threads the highest ridge of the wood. Here they had walked, Helen and Rachel, along this quiet causeway, upon the pavement of green turf, shut in on either side by high banks of red earth and tall hedges of shining beech, and here I followed in their steps, looking out now and again through the partings in the boughs, and seeing on one side the sweep of the wood stretching far to right and left, and sinking into the broad level, and beyond the yellow sea and the land over the sea. On the other side was the valley and the river, and hill following hill as wave on wave, and wood and meadow and cornfield, and white houses gleaming, and a great wall of mountain, and far blue peaks in the north. And so at last I come to the place. The track went up a gentle slope, and widened out into an open space with a wall of thick undergrowth around it, and then narrowing again, passed on into the distance in the faint mist of summer heat. And into this pleasant summer glade Rachel passed a girl, and left it, who shall say what? I did not stay long there. Yes, it's horrific. It's the worst thing in this whole story. In a small town near Kaiman, there is a museum containing for the most part Roman remains which have been found in the neighbourhood at various times. On the day after my arrival in Kaiman, I walked over to the town in question and took the opportunity of inspecting the museum. After I had seen most of the sculptured stones, the coffins, rings, coins, and fragments of tessellated pavement which the place contains, I was shown a small square pillar of white stone, which had been recently discovered in the wood of which I have been speaking. And, as I found on inquiry, in that open space where the Roman road broadens out. In that very space? On one side of the pillar was an inscription, of which I took a note. Some of the letters have been defaced, but I do not think that there can be any doubt as to those which I supply. The inscription is as follows: Devon nodenti Flavius Senilis, Flavius Senilis, posuit propter nuptias, quas vidit sub umbra. Fuck you! Don't do that. Ow. It's a very interesting inscription. To the great god Nodens, the god of the great deep or abyss, Flavius Senilis has erected this pillar on account of the marriage which he saw beneath the shade. The custodian of the museum informed me that local antiquaries were much puzzled, not by the inscription or by any difficulty in translating it, but as to the circumstance or rite to which allusion is made. I have. Yeah, I have. That's pretty cool. I'm not Helen Vaughan. I'm just me. I haven't done anything um sufficiently debauched at a party since probably uni. I'm nice now. And now, my dear Clark, I'm guessing that this is that we're ending as we started with Raymond, Dr. Raymond. And now, my dear Clark, as to what you tell me about Helen Vaughan, whom you say you saw die under circumstances of the utmost and almost incredible horror. I was interested in your account, but a good deal, nay, all of what you told me, I knew already. I can understand the strange likeness you remarked in both the portrait and in the actual face. You have seen Helen's mother. You remember that still summer night so many years ago, when I talked to you of the world beyond the shadows and of the god Pan. You remember Mary. She was the mother of Helen Vaughan, who was born 9 months after that night. Mary never recovered her reason. She lay, as you saw her, all the while upon her bed, and a few days after the child was born, she died. I fancy that just at the last she knew me. I was standing by the bed, and the old look came into her eyes for a second, and then she shuddered and groaned and died. It was an ill work I did that night when you were present. I broke open the door of the house of life without knowing or caring what might pass forth or enter in. I recollect your telling me at the time, sharply enough, and rightly too, in one sense, that I had ruined the reason of a human being by a foolish experiment based on an absurd theory. You did well to blame me, but my theory was not all absurdity. What I said Mary would see, she saw. But I forgot that no human eyes can look on such a sight with impunity. And I forgot, as I have just said, that when the house of life is thus thrown open, there may enter in that for which we have no name, and human flesh may become the veil of a horror one dare not express. I played with energies which I did not understand. You have seen the ending of it. Helen Vaughan did well to bind the cord about her neck and die, though the death was horrible. The blackened face, the hideous form upon the bed, changing and melting before your eyes from woman to man to beast, and from beast to worse than beast, all the strange horror that you witnessed, surprises me but little. When you say the doctor whom you sent for saw and shuddered at, I noticed long ago, and knew what I had done the moment the child was born. And when it was scarcely 5 years old, I surprised it, not once or twice, but several times, with a playmate. You may guess of what kind. It was for me a constant, an incarnate horror, and after a few years I felt I could bear it no more, and I sent Helen Vaughan away. You know now what frightened the boy in the wood. The rest of the strange story, and all else that you tell me as discovered by your friend, I have contrived to learn from time to time, almost to the last chapter. And now Helen is with her companions. The end. Note: Helen Vaughan was born on August 5th, 1865 at the Red House, Breconshire, and died on July 25th, 1888 in her house in a street off Piccadilly, called Ashley Street in the story. The end. Oh, Josh, you are gonna love Death Becomes Her. Oh my god, you're gonna love it so much. I'm so jealous of you seeing it for the first time. Doctor Whom? She was So it's a very interesting story. There's a lot that goes unsaid. There's a lot that's said. There's I mean, but yeah, bye Josh, you're gonna love it. Um a lot of people have talked about this story in terms of misogyny, which in some ways is fair. Um but I don't think it's that important that Helen is a woman, you know? I think it's because she was a woman that she um, could gain people's trust more easily. But I don't think it's anything inherent in femininity that was so frightening. Yeah, they do a good job of saying just enough that you're glad it stops. Yeah. Well, what happened was that she and while she was dying, her body kind of proved that it was made part human and part by a thing outside of our world, because it kind of shifted from woman to man and then from human to animal and then from animal to, it's implied, the shape of Pan, briefly, in a way that didn't make anyone insane but definitely upset them. um, People have asked why Helen died. I mean, why would you kill yourself when you're the antichrist, kind of? Why would you just kill yourself because a couple of guys threatened to out you to society? um I mean, personally, I think that Helen was bored. Yeah, why wouldn't you? I think she was bored. I think she'd done what she came there to do, and dying really just sent whatever part of her was a soul um, to that place that they had made Mary look at. I think she went back to the reality that's under our reality. I don't think it was really death for her, but there's a lot of interpretations there. And again, I don't think it's misogynist. I don't think it's a sexist story. Um, I think that it's about what happens when you have science without God. Basically, you'll let entities through just to see what happens. I mean, Arthur Markin would be terrified of the Great Hadron Collider. Oh my God, what if that's what happens to it? What if that's why all this 2020 is happening? No, it isn't. Come on, wake up. Yeah, so the nature of Helen's crimes, the nature of Helen, really, is you kind of, the story slides around it the way your mind would slide around a Lovecraftian horror, because to understand it would be to go mad. Um, Thank you, Josh. I probably will sign off while you're delayed, but thank you, the great God Hadron. So yeah, if you guys have any thoughts about the story, I know it's been a really long video, couple of videos, but if you have any thoughts about the story you want to talk about. But yeah, you can see how Arthur Markin was such a huge influence on Lovecraft and people like him. Yeah, it was subtle. It was, you learned, like John said, just enough to make you glad you didn't know more. You know, like the creatures that came and played with Helen when she was little, and the creatures that played with Helen in the woods, that drove that little boy insane when he saw them. and the creatures that came and visited Rachel when she was a pubescent girl with Helen in the woods. I can't remember how Rachel died. I'm not sure if we were actually told. We were told that she died, but I can't remember how. No, it says that Rachel was telling her mother a wild story, and then Clark got freaked out and dropped the manuscript. So Rachel M. since deceased. That's it. I mean, the fact they don't mention how she died anywhere suggests to me that it was probably suicide or a botched abortion of a hideous creature or something, you know. Yeah, and the Roman ruins, the constant references to places where the Romans had been and where they had been worshipping Nodens, but in this case it seems to be a stand-in for Pan, for like primordial chaos, for a Lovecraftian entity, if you like. Yeah, if it wasn't awful, they would have told us. And considering the things they've told us, pretty awful. So it can seem kind of impenetrable while you're reading it. You're just like, you've got to stop cutting off. I want to know. But then you're like, oh, did I though? Okay, bye, Nick. Thank you for staying for for the whole thing. I know it's been really long. I hope you get something awesome for tea. I do not know what I'm having. I'm gonna have to think. But yeah, thanks everybody for being here for the Great God Pan. I think I will probably do the white people next because we seem to be keen on Arthur Markin. And, you know, maybe at some point I'll do some Robert W. Chambers. Oh, yeah, it was David Cameron sticking it in a dead pig's head. That was the thing that he saw that had been on the list of entertainments at Helen Vaughan's place. And he was like, oh, God, oh, that's the worst thing I've ever seen because I'm a Victorian. I think. But yeah, The White People is a stream of consciousness written by a young girl. So kind of prepare yourself for something peculiar. And something quite a bit less restrained than this. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me today for this. It's all been really fun. And now I kind of want to watch Death Becomes Her again. Okay, so I'll see you guys tomorrow. Yes, because I don't have D&D until Saturday. Thank you so much. It makes me do more of them if people are actually enjoying them. And we will go back to Valette, don't worry. But, you know, it's October. Thanks, you guys. Wash your hands. Look after each other. And I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.